The Mare is an entity documented across every continent that sits on your chest while you sleep, paralyzing you completely while you watch a shadowy figure in your room and feel yourself suffocating. If that sounds terrifying, don't worry. Only about 50% of people will ever encounter her in their lifetime, which means half of you watching this are safe. As for the other half, watch out. The Mare goes by different names depending on where your ancestors decided to settle. In Japan, it's called Kanashibari, which literally means bound in metal, cause being paralyzed feels like you're being wrapped in chains apparently. The Inuit, who are people living in the Arctic, call it, bear with me as I try to pronounce it, the Ukaminuriak. The Scandinavians blame the Mare, which translates to crusher, and in Newfoundland, they just call it the Old Hag, which is refreshingly straightforward. And the medieval Europeans were so terrified of the Mare that now the literal word for bad dreams is nightmare. The entity appears as a shadowy figure, sometimes an old woman, sometimes a demon with red eyes, sometimes a tall man in a hat, and in modern reports, increasingly as aliens or the Slender Man-looking Hat Man, because your brain updates its nightmare roster based on whatever cultural horror you've absorbed lately. But there's a rather boring explanation for all of this, and as usual, science has ruined all the fun by calling it sleep paralysis with hypnagogic hallucinations. Apparently, during REM sleep, your body enters a state called REM atonia, where your muscles are paralyzed to stop you acting out in dreams and accidentally punching your partner in the face. Sometimes your conscious mind wakes up before this paralysis wears off, leaving you awake, aware, and completely unable to move while your brain is still partially in dream mode, generating hallucinations. Your breathing becomes shallow because your diaphragm is barely functioning. Your panicking mind interprets this pressure as something sitting on your chest, and your threat detection system, realizing something is very wrong but not understanding what, does what brains do best when confused and manufactures a demon to explain the situation. About 8% of the general population experiences this regularly, with rates jumping to 28% among college students and 32% in psychiatric patients, because apparently stress and mental illness needed another symptom to collect. The hallucinations are so consistent across cultures that researchers initially thought there must be something supernatural going on. But it turns out, when you trap a conscious mind in a paralyzed body, it universally decides the explanation is malevolent entity rather than my sleep cycle is fucked. But whether or not the same can be said about the next entity is up to you. The Incubus is the entity that shows up in your bedroom at night and decides that paralysis wasn't enough, so it adds sexual to the experience. If you thought waking up unable to move was bad, wait until you feel something touching you, pressing its weight against you, and violating every boundary while you're completely helpless to stop it. Good news is only a fraction of sleep paralysis sufferers report this specific type of nightmare. Bad news is that fraction still accounts for millions of people throughout history who woke up violated by something they couldn't see. The name Incubus comes from Latin, meaning to lie upon, which is just ancient Rome's way of being rather uncomfortably literal about demons. The female version is called a succubus, from to lie beneath, because apparently medieval scholars needed to specify the sexual position of their nightmares. In Islamic tradition, it's the jinn, supernatural beings made of smokeless fire who can take physical form and have been blamed for everything from possession to unwanted pregnancies. The jinn are particularly interesting because unlike Christian demons who are just evil, jinn in Islamic theology have free will, meaning some are good, some are evil, some are just bored and decided harassing sleeping humans sounded fun. Throughout history, the Incubus has been the most convenient scapegoat humanity ever created. Medieval Europe used it to explain why nuns kept getting pregnant despite their vows of chastity, because clearly a demon seduced them, rather than that visiting priest everyone keeps mentioning. Women accused of adultery would claim an incubus visited them, and depending on how religious the court was feeling that day, they'd either be executed for lying or pitied for being demonically assaulted. Men who woke up from wet dreams they didn't want to explain blamed succubi. Everyone wins, except for the demons who keep getting blamed for human biology. Because, once again, there's a rather boring explanation for all of this. And, as usual, science has ruined all the fun. Apparently, the same REM atonia that causes regular sleep paralysis can also activate the parts of your brain associated with arousal and physical sensation while you're still in dream hallucination state. Your body's lying there paralyzed, your brain's misfiring, and suddenly you're experiencing tactile hallucinations that feel indistinguishable from actual touch. Some people report feeling weight on their body, hands touching them, or full-on freaky sensations complete with physical arousal they can't control. Because your autonomic nervous system doesn't give a shit that you're terrified and continues doing its thing regardless. Studies show about 11% of sleep paralysis episodes include these sexual or physically intrusive hallucinations, with rates higher in people who've experienced actual sexual trauma, because apparently your brain's favorite hobby is making your worst experiences even worse by replaying them when you're most vulnerable. But at least the incubus leaves after it's done getting freaky. The next entity doesn't. The doppelganger is what you see when you wake up paralyzed and there's someone standing at the foot of your bed watching you sleep. Except that person is not a stranger or a demon or even a shadowy figure, but you, yourself, your exact face staring back at you with an expression you've never made before. Sometimes it just watches and occasionally smiles, but sometimes it speaks in your voice and says things you'd never say. If that sounds like an existential nightmare designed to make you question your own identity, congratulations! You understand why every culture that's encountered this phenomenon decided it was the literal omen of death itself. The word doppelganger comes from German, meaning double walker, which is unsettling poetic for what amounts to evil twin standing in your bedroom. In Finnish folklore, it's called etiainen, a spirit that looks exactly like you and shows up right before something catastrophic happens to you specifically. The Scots call it a fetch, the Irish call it a tiveshay, and in English folklore, it was simply called your wraith, which was your ghostly double that only appeared when you were about to die. But the most interesting version is the Middle Eastern one, called the Kareen, which is the jinn version of you that's born with you and stays with you until you die, while trying to actively ruin your life and get you to disobey God so that it can take you to hell with it. And sometimes it just gets bored and decides to play a prank on you by appearing in your dreams or right after you wake up. Historically, seeing your doppelganger wasn't just creepy, it was a death sentence. Queen Elizabeth I allegedly saw hers lying on her bed shortly before she died. Abraham Lincoln reported seeing two reflections of himself in a mirror, one significantly paler than the other, which his wife interpreted as meaning that he died during his second term. And as everyone who paid attention in history class knows, he kinda did. Because, once again, there's a rather boring explanation for all of this. And as usual, science has ruined all the fun. Apparently, what you're experiencing is called an autoscopic hallucination, which is just the medical term for your brain's self-recognition system has catastrophically malfunctioned. The temporoparietal junction in your brain is responsible for distinguishing between the self and others, and for maintaining your sense of where your body is in space. During sleep paralysis, this system can misfire while your visual cortex is still generating dream energy, resulting in your brain projecting an image of yourself outside your body. Your mind knows what you look like, obviously. It has a detailed map of your face and body, so when it hallucinates during that paralyzed state, Sometimes it hallucinates you. Studies on autoscopic phenomena show they're more common in people with neurological conditions, extreme fatigue, or high stress, because apparently your brain needs to be somewhat broken or exhausted to forget which body is actually yours. But at least your doppelganger is something you instantly recognize. The next entity is something that deceives you more than all the others. The child that isn't a child is what shows up in your nightmares when your brain decides regular monsters aren't disturbing enough, so it manufactures something small with a child's silhouette, but the movements are just wrong. The head tilts at angles no neck should be able to bend, as long as the person it belongs to is alive anyway, and the limbs move in sequences that don't match human joints. And when you get close enough to see its face, its eyes appear to be ancient, far too knowing, like something that's been alive since before your great-grandma was born and decided to wear a child's skin for the evening. Usually it just stands there, watching you, but sometimes it asks in a child's voice if it can come closer, if you'll play with it, if you'll follow it somewhere. And the worst part is some deep instinct in your brain screams that if you say yes, you are not waking up. In Japanese folklore, it's the zashiki warashi, child spirits that haunt homes and are usually considered good luck, except for the ones that appear in nightmares with their faces just slightly wrong, offering gifts you know you shouldn't accept. European folklore is filled with similar creatures called the changelings, fairy children left in place of stolen human babies who never quite acted right, never grew properly, and stared at their adoptive parents with eyes that held too much knowledge. Parents who suspected their child was a changeling would sometimes abandon them, or worse, because living with something that looked like your child but fundamentally wasn't drove people to madness. In Filipino culture, it's the tiyanak, a demonic creature that takes the form of a crying infant to lure travelers close before revealing rows of teeth and claws. The tiyanak specifically targets people walking alone at night, and the folklore warns that if you hear a baby crying in the forest, you walk the other direction, because whatever is making that sound stopped being human a long time ago. But sometimes it just ditches the whole luring thing and just penetrates into your dreams. The consistency across cultures is unsettling because corrupted children are humanity's universal nightmare, something that takes innocence and makes it predatory, that transforms the thing we're hardwired to protect into the thing we should run from. But at least this entity stays in your nightmares. The next one follows you into the waking world. The threshold entity is what you encounter when you're having a nightmare and your brain decides that you've had enough and tries to wake you up. Except there's something standing in the doorway of your bedroom and it won't let you leave. You're dreaming, you know you're dreaming, and you're trying desperately to wake up. But every time you reach that edge between sleep and consciousness, something pushes you back. You can feel your real body in bed and can hear the sounds from the waking world. But there's a figure blocking the exit, standing perfectly still in the doorframe, and it won't move until it's done with you, which could be minutes or hours, depending on how generous it's feeling. Assuming, of course, that you ever wake up at all. The entity doesn't have one consistent name because it exists in the space between things, and humans have always been terrified of in-between spaces. In Japanese folklore, it's related to the Baku, dream-eating spirits that were supposed to protect you from nightmares, but occasionally got too interested in your dreams and decided to keep you there. In Greek mythology, it's the psychopomps, spirits that guard the threshold between life and death. And if you've ever had a nightmare where you genuinely weren't sure if you were dying, congratulations, you've met one. But the most unsettling version comes from Islamic tradition, where once again, the infamous jinn are said to trap people in false awakenings, dreams where you think you've woken up, but you're still asleep and vulnerable, trapped in their world. You wake up in your bed, try to get up, but something's wrong. The room's slightly off, the doorway leads somewhere it shouldn't, and then suddenly you wake up again, not knowing if you've woken up into yet another dream. The cycle continues, and when you finally actually wake up for real, hours have passed, and you've got no memory of where you've been, which is deeply concerning when you consider what might have been done to you while you were gone. The threshold entity doesn't chase you or attack you directly, it just won't let you leave. And sometimes that's worse.